Skill 2 for clinical educator training is curriculum planning conferences. Thomas Edison said, "Good fortune is what happens when opportunity meets planning." In Skill 2, clinical educator facilitators build a capacity and guide the learning for clinical educators. Just as a reminder, clinical educators in this course will also be referred to as school counselor supervisors. To conduct effective content planning conferences with developing professionals. The developing professionals are your school counselor interns. Skill 2 has two main goals. First, clinical educator facilitators will work with the clinical educator to build an understanding of the effective elements of content planning conferences, which include developing alignment of standards, objectives, content, activities and tasks, and assessments to ensure student mastery. Second, clinical educator facilitators develop the capacity of clinical educators to provide coaching strategies and necessary resources when conducting content planning conferences with developing educators. There are 6 components to the teacher rubric for the E3 under Domain 1 planning. This is important for our interns to know because if they are teaching a lesson, when they are being observed, formally observed, they will also be observed by their teaching. In the teacher plan, we have 1A, demonstrating knowledge of content and pedagogy. 1B, demonstrating knowledge of students. 1C, setting instructional outcomes. 1D, demonstrating knowledge of resources. 1E, designing coherent instruction. And 1F, designing student assessments. Alan Lincoln said that planning is bringing the future into the present so that you can do something about it now. School counselor interns must also be aware that they have their own E3 rubric for Domain 1 planning. 1A is demonstrating knowledge of counseling theory and techniques. Examples like individual consultations and group processes. 1B, demonstrating knowledge of child and adolescent development. 1C, establishing goals for the counseling programs appropriate to the setting and the student served. 1D, demonstrating knowledge of state and federal regulations and resources within and beyond the school and district. 1E, planning the counseling program using individual and small group sessions and in-class activities and include crisis prevention, intervention, and response. 1F, developing a plan to evaluate the counseling program. In the Google Classroom, you're going to give an opportunity to provide an alignment between the best practices that are identified by the ASCA, as well as how does it align to the E3 rubric. And so in the Google Classroom will be a link to a spreadsheet, and you simply mark an X. I'll show you what that looks like real quick. When you open up the spreadsheet, you can see that you'll have the E3 component and the descriptor of the highly effective. And then along here to the right, in the vertical column here, you will see that the listings of the best practices identified by the ASCA. And you simply mark an X where you think each of those Danielson components for which their school counselors will be evaluated align to these best practices. There's no set right or wrong answer. It's simply a reflection of how do you take what we evaluate you with and how does that align with what your professional organization says are the best practices for your work. Once you've completed that, you'll submit a reflection that says, that tells me a little bit about what your thinking was as you were working through the alignment piece here.